How do you know when to pivot versus how do you know when to push through? I feel like this is a big conversation that comes up a lot in our world because sometimes a pivot is all you need to see what you're looking to see. Sometimes you need that big shift. Sometimes it's about pushing through, and how do you know? We've gone through many pivots in our life, whether it's in business, whether it's in going from like more of a full time job to more of building our own thing. Like there's been some scary pivots, right? These big steps of faith where I feel like, wow, this is a big shift, right? Going from single to being married, going from married to having kids, going from having a son to having two sons. Like these are major pivots. And we've done podcast episodes, honestly, about a lot of them. But we want to talk about this because I feel like there is this tension between like power through, keep going, and also like I need to make a shift.
Hey, real quick, you're about to hear another awesome episode at the Rainmaker Family Show, but I wanted to put out just a little disclaimer that my mic was accidentally turned off the entire time. So we had to do some crazy editing to make the audio sound okay. So if you hear some like muffledness or like, why is that off? That's why, but sit back and enjoy this episode.
I feel like when we're talking about pivoting, right? Pivoting is about a change of direction. Okay. And I think that's a core thing we need to remember in this conversation because I think there's a lot of people that will pivot all the time, right? But they're not really going in a direction. They're actually just going in circles. And we've seen this kind of be the curse of early stage entrepreneurs is like jumping from one shiny object to another. And that's not what we're talking about. And we're not talking about just like quitting at the sign of first like resistance, right? We've done whole episodes on like sometimes that resistance is actually a green flag telling you that you're going in the right direction because you're getting yourself uncomfortable. And if you want to see different results in your life, you got to act different now, right? And not just repeat the same thing. And so there's this balance. I think when we talk about pivot, I think it's like let's just pull back whatever you're feeling like pivoting from. I would actually like go to like what direction, like where am I pointing towards? Like where is my compass pointing towards? I think a big conversation that happens in our world because we teach entrepreneurship, we teach starting an online business is like, I'm thinking about quitting my job, right? Like I'm thinking about quitting that 9 to 5. And a lot of people hold on to it. And so I think one of the things that can give you a lot of clarity is like, what's the direction of that thing, right? Like, where is that thing taking you? And so a lot of times, like, what we do in Rainmakers with e-commerce, like it's more of a long-term play, but the direction it's going is like family freedom, right? I want to build a business. I want to sell a business. I want to have more leverage in my life. If that's the ultimate direction you want to go, then pivoting into that could be more of a positive direction for your family. Then let me work this job over and over and over and just kind of like trade dollars for hours for the rest of my life, right? So like you got to think about like what the direction, but maybe you're the opposite spectrum. Maybe you're like, I love my career. I see a direction there, an ascension pathway, and I want to go down that pathway. But maybe there's a pivot within that that allows you to point even more clear in the right direction, right? So this is all about like direction. Where are you going? And I feel like sometimes we do hit these kind of brick walls, or we do sense like we call this, and me and Chelsea are talking, we call this like the grace leaving. Sometimes like you're in a season and something feels really good, and then you kind of feel like, it's not like the grace for this. Like it was kind of like exciting. It was easy, and it's kind of like leaving, right? It's like leaving, and again, it's this fine balance between sometimes it's pushing through those things and having stamina in business and like mindset and all those things, but other times it's like, I feel like there's this thing over here that I need to go after because there's something there on it.
And in every business that Steve and I have ever run, I have always been super consistent in the task or in my contribution towards the business. When we were in the wedding industry, I was really consistent with our client and creating an experience that if a bride hired us for one date, 1 year, she would have the same consistent, incredible experience that the next client would have. I was also the one that was consistently blogging. And because of that consistency, and putting in time, even when I'm like, is anybody reading this besides my mom and the bride and her and like a couple of her friends? I saw that consistency book us weddings, and we never had to spend $1 on advertising because of that consistency. And Rainmakers, when Rainmakers really started to take off, like in the beginning, like I was running still our wedding business. Again, I was consistently running that, which gave Steven space to kind of explore and figure out what those alternative revenue sources were. And then we found Amazon, and it was like this consistency that Steven got to build. And then as we started telling friends and family, that's where Rainmaker started taking off. So Steven had built the system as far as like numbers and product qualifying things and all of the nitty gritty data that you really need to start a business. And then I kind of stepped in and I saw what he had done and the system he had there. And then I made it consistent. And I think understanding your strengths, I think what I'm getting at is like, because consistency is my strength, whether I'm going to show up on social media and post consistently or whatever I'm building, there's an element of consistency that needs to happen. But I think in that consistency, there are opportunities to pivot or to reevaluate. And I think the best example that I can give you from my own personal life recently was around the holidays. There's a lot going on, I think, in everyone's life, especially if you're a mom running a business around the holidays. I think that there is this pressure to make the holidays really special for your family, as well as like, Q4 is big for e-commerce and making sales while also, attending this event. And there's just, I feel like more happening in the calendar year around the holidays. And I know for me personally, like I was feeling that. Like we had a team retreat. I'm looking towards 2024 and knowing what's ahead and the business launches we want to do. On top of that was Kaizen's birthday. And I was just feeling like my mind was just on constant like autopilot and just like running a million miles a minute. And I think a lot of moms can relate to that same feeling that I experienced during the holidays. And right after Christmas, we jumped on a plane and we went to the beach with our family. And it took me a few days to finally like take a deep breath and settle. And I refer to this as being in a place where I can let my mind wander. I don't know if any other moms can relate to this, where your mind can just like wander. And it's actually a really good thing. It's a good thing to be in that space where you can like think creatively. And I hadn't had that in a really long time. And so for me, because I know that about myself, that in order for me to create and to show up strong as a leader, I need space where my mind can wander. And I hadn't had that for a long time. And so for me, even though I'm a consistent person and the tasks that we are doing and systems we have in place are really important for growth and where we're headed, because we know where we're headed, I needed to pivot in that consistency because I didn't have space to let my mind wander. So I had a really relaxing week. And then we came back home for vacation. And I told Steven, like, we're the business owners. Like, sometimes we don't take advantage of being the business owners and essentially being the boss of an organization. And so I just said, like, I am not going to come to work this week. I'm going to like rest. And one of the days, like, I had to take care of the boys because Steven had the stomach bug. But it was,
We literally just did an episode on like how to not get sick while you travel, and then I got sick.
Yeah, but that's okay.
But it's very a rare occasion, but I did get
Yes.
sick on this
Yeah.
one.
but on that day that I was even watching the boys, like, I had so much fun with them because my routine was off and I was in this like slow state of having fun as a mom. And it was honestly like exactly what I needed. So, we came back on Sunday, Monday, I kind of took the day off. Tuesday, I took the day off. It wasn't until like Wednesday or Thursday that I was feeling again in momentum. And here we are now, the week later, recording this podcast. So for me, it was like that small little pivot of recognizing I needed space away from certain things. I needed to shut that off to let my mind wander. And then what I'm taking with me as an action item so that that doesn't happen again, or if it happens, I know what to do. I'm just being like really gangster. I think that's the best word that I can come up with. Being really gangster on protecting my calendar. And we have a lot of things coming up in the next couple of months that involve a lot of pieces. And we are like just being really strict about when those are being scheduled. And if they happen to be scheduled on a day that I am not, quote unquote, in the office or taking meetings, I am choosing to just not show up. And I'm letting other team members take that, or Steven are getting the cliff notes, because I have guidelines and boundaries in place for a reason. And I find that when I say yes and break those like little promises that I made to yourself, that's where like that burnout initiative comes. And I think also like what I'm practically doing is just saying no to like FOMO. Like I am actually not missing out because what is in front of me and the guidelines that I have in place are so important for my sanity first. And I think that's just like the best practical example that I can give to you as far as like burnout and when to pivot and when you know you need to change and do something differently. Because for me, that was very real a couple weeks ago, and that is how I handled it.
Any seasoned entrepreneur will tell you it's not about how much you make, it's how much you keep. We got to increase your income while decreasing your expenses. So, what if there's a way to decrease your taxes, to protect you against liability, and to open up doors to business funding for your business? This is where our friends at Prime Corporate Services come in handy. They're experts and they help our Rainmakers get structured in the right way. We worked out a deal with them just for our Rainmaker community to get you a free complimentary consultation with one of their experts. If you're starting a business and you want to get all your ducks in a row when it comes to the legal entity for your business structure, these guys are the go-to. If for a similar package, you would pay like $1,200 on LegalZoom, but this company gives our Rainmaker family a serious hookup. Not only can Prime help you out with getting all your business entities set up, they can help you with your taxes as your business is rolling, and eventually help you with even estate planning for your family legacy. We put all the info on rainmakerfamily.com/deals. Go there, you can book a free complimentary consultation with Prime Corporate and get set up today. Again, that's rainmakerfamily.com/deals. Yeah, I feel like just hearing you talk, I feel like pivots are not about identity changes. They're more about vehicle changes or kind of like systems or modality changes. And so I think where people can feel thrown all over the place is like trying to change who they are, but I think like when we look at all the pivots that we have done, major pivots, whether it's in business and life, like it's either like, it's usually like, it's almost like clarifying like what you need and who you are, and then like putting that in a different vehicle, a different system, right? And so oftentimes, like if you're considering a pivot, like I think a really good exercise to go through, the book 10x is easier than 2x has a great exercise where they talk you through like what were those big kind of like quantum jumps in your life where like things just like man, that just really moved the needle. It was like a 10x jump, whether it was in relationships and business, financially. Like you could just like kind of like if you had to put like a movie title on that season, like just going through your life and listing out these like big jumps, right? I went from W-2 employee to 1099 contractor, right? I became an independent contractor, right? Or I went from one-to-one clients to one-to-many clients, right? Like what were these changes, like seasons and like these big 10x jumps? And then the book tells you to dig into kind of like what was the 80% new that you had to do in that season, right? And then what was like the 20% that was like kind of the consistent thing that stayed from the last season. I actually did this exercise for myself personally, and a lot of the big pivots that we made that had these massive impact in our life, business, and financially, this 20% was very the same on all of them, right? The 80% new kind of was like new skills, new things, new vehicle, right? New vehicle, new vehicle. But that 20% identity, like wiring superpower, was the thing that stayed. And you heard Chelsea say that too. Even though she's like pivoting in even her modality, how she shows up, work schedule, pivoting from 0 kids to 1 kid to 2 kids. We've had to have these main pivots. Her superpower and how she shows up for the brand and the business has kind of stayed the same. So I think that I would encourage you if like, there's like you're feeling like, oh man, I'm feeling like a pivot in my life. Maybe I want to start this business. Maybe I want to launch this thing. Maybe I want to add this new brand. Like whatever that thing is that you're considering, I would kind of ask yourself like, who am I, and who like what is that superpower that can lean in there? Because the vehicle could change, but like you are going to show up, and if you can show up with that 20% like superpower, like that's going to really make that vehicle, whatever that change is, most powerful.
And sometimes there's these external factors that encourage you to pivot as well. And there's definitely a fine line between this pivot, especially when it comes to external factors. I think, there's always going to be some news article that is instilling fear or doubt in something. And it's really important to think about who are you listening to when it comes to those pivots, because there's a lot of negativity out there. There's a lot of people trying to make money off of just whatever that to get you to sway, to join their thing, to do whatever. And I do think you have to have some kind of like solid baseline before you just go make a big change, especially when it comes to a product or service. But one of the simplest ways that sometimes we'll make a pivot or a change is based off of feedback. And if you have any type of business at all, you should be asking your customers for feedback. And of course, I think there needs to be a system and how often and when you check this, and also realize that there are just things that sometimes your customers don't understand is going on as far as like the price of something or, well, actually, I can't manufacture it this way because of these reasons. But I think taking into account what the market is saying is a valuable place to figure out if you need to pivot or not.
That's right. Yeah. So consider these internal things first and then consider the external factors, right? The market, feedback from the customers. I mean, we've seen stuff even in our business where just the language shifts, right? We used to use certain language when talking about our program that we don't use as much anymore because the marketplace has responded to that language differently than it does now. I mean, even like with COVID, right? COVID kind of changed the landscape and like people were thinking different. A lot of people were pivoting in that season, and so we leaned into that, and we were pivoting ourselves like during that season and leaning more into this work from home lifestyle. And so I would say as we go into this year, which is at the time we're recording this an election year, that's just something to know that like that's can be more it's a year where people are bumping heads a little bit more, right? There's like a ton of ad spend on social media platforms, right? So like ad spend can be more expensive. There's just like a little bit more division kind of in the air, right? So how could you not just react to culture, but how could you actually be proactive and actually create culture, right? Like for us, like I remember during 2020, right? There was a lot of the similar stuff in the air. And it was really like I was actually just talking with someone who was in our group at that time. It was like, man, our community during that time was kind of like this like magical place on the internet where there wasn't all this political drama. It was really sweet, but that was intentional, right? Like we intentionally created that culture so that it would be a refreshing place because when you went on Facebook during that season, it was just like gnarly. It was just intense all the time. There was just like, oh my gosh, it was just like heightened. But then we had this like safe haven and we created that culture proactively, which was attractive to people who were seeking that because they couldn't find it anywhere else in their life. Right. And so, how can you know what's kind of coming looking down the pipeline a little bit? And how could you start to create culture? Right. How could you actually get the market to respond to you, your voice, what you're putting out there, and helping people pivot maybe out of what's out there into what you have in your business?
And I want to encourage you to, when you do go to make pivots, oftentimes, at least for me, whenever I made a pivot, I will look back on like the last 5 months of me not like leading up to the pivot and being like, why didn't I make that sooner? Look at this change and how it's affected my life. And I think the best example I could give of this is when Steven and I were really young, we were about to get married. I was still working at my one of my first jobs. It was at a fast food place, In and Out Burger, shout out. And Steven for months had been encouraging me to quit. He's like, you need to quit. We already started this photography business. You could go full time, put more of your hours. And for me, working at In and Out was like this safety net. No one in my family were strong entrepreneurs. I didn't have any model. And honestly, like that small little paycheck that I was getting was a security blanket that just felt really comfortable. And Steven had been encouraging me. And it wasn't until like a conversation with a good friend of mine, and she encouraged me to quit essentially. And I came back to Steven, I'm like, I'm ready to quit. He's like, I told you to do this months ago. And of course, as soon as I did quit, I was like, why didn't I do that sooner? But I wasn't ready then. Like sometimes the people in your life can tell you multiple times, or maybe you're that person who's telling your friend, like, hey, I believe in you. I see this in you. And having those mindsets and those shifts usually are not an overnight thing. And so I just want to extend that grace to you and knowing that like you will change, you will pivot in the time that you are supposed to. And you can't beat yourself up for the past. All you can do is look ahead and say, what person do I need to become to make a powerful decision in the future?
Well, in this episode, by coming back to one of our core philosophies at Rainmakers, which is to see fruit in your future, you need to trim the vine. This is a saying we say a lot in Rainmakers, which is that vines overextended will just grow sticks, right? When a vine is growing, if you don't trim it back to the fruit every season, it'll actually just keep growing and growing and growing. No nutrients will make it out there and it just stops growing fruit. And so, one big indicator of knowing when to pivot is checking your fruit, right? Checking the results. and checking like, not just financial results, but like your whole self. Like, how is this thing making you feel? Is this thing bringing you peace? Is it bringing you more freedom? Is it creating transformation in your life? Right? Check the fruit on these things. And a lot of times we've made decisions through this. And like we might have, okay, maybe we have three different pivots in front of us, right? Three different things that we could go, like these different pathways. How do we make that decision? We start to look at the fruit, right? And if this one over here has a little bit of fruit and these two have no fruit, we're going to go after that one, right? And we're going to kind of trim out the other things, which can be hard, can be painful to say, I'm not going to do those. I'm going to say no to those things, like Chelsea said. Like she looks at her calendar and she's like, I have to say no. I have to trim the vine, right? I have to say no to those things, say no to FOMO. I have to focus on the fruit, which is like, I have to be with my boys. My mind can wander. Like I feel free and like I'm not overwhelmed, right? The fruit of saying yes to those things, overwhelm, stress, burnout, right? And so she's checking the fruit and she's leaning into the fruit, right? And so that is a strategy we talk about a lot in Rainmakers because seasonally we see people need to do this. Like oftentimes we just take on too many things and seasonally, like you got to trim a vine every year, right? You got to trim it back to the fruit, like check yourself, look at the results, look at what's going on. What are you saying yes to? What are you saying no to, right? And trim back to the good things, right? And then you're going to grow more fruit in the next season because of that.
I just want to say, like, when you experience those, we call them walls in Rainmakers, those walls that want to like hold you back. That doesn't necessarily mean just to completely pivot and quit. Like, Stephen and I are not sharing with you, like, when we say pivot, we're not just saying completely quit. Like, I do think that entrepreneurs do give up easily and then they go chase the next big shiny thing. And as soon as they hit a wall, they freak out, they feel overwhelmed, they're having all these negative thoughts. And you have to see it as this is a pattern. This is like your brain does want to keep you comfortable. And so sometimes a pivot is learning how to push through the pain, I believe. So, like, if you are experiencing something that you feel like might be a pivot, I would just like check circumstances around you because sometimes it's like that pushback that you actually need to push through to get that result that you are really wanting. So, looking at your life, looking at does it give you leverage? Is it like the end goal destination of that time freedom, that financial freedom?
So, as we wrap up this episode of the Rainmaker Family Show, we hope this conversation was helpful to you as you might be considering a pivot. We've gone through many of these, we've been there before. And when you can really go down to the root of something and say, how do I show up powerfully in this pivot? How do I stay true to myself? And what's the vehicle? Like, what is the direction of that thing? And is that something I want to like power through, or is it something I want to pivot and go in another direction because this direction has more fruit than this one? We recommend with episodes like this that are a little bit more mindset higher level to take it from head to heart and make it real somehow in your life. Like, what is that one thing you could do? I love the question that is just like in the next 5 minutes, like you're going to end this episode in the next 5 minutes. What's the easiest thing that you could do to just take a little micro step towards that pivot? If you know that's good for you, you've just been procrastinating it. What's the easiest thing that you could literally do in the next 5 minutes? It's not going to maybe be the whole thing, but just give me a tiny, tiny step towards that. Do that in the next 5 minutes. That's a really great hack to get you in momentum to start that thing. What is that thing? Go do it now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. If you're not a part of our mastermind yet, I want to say I think you're missing out. Our heart here at Rainmaker is to create total abundance for you. That's why we're offering a free one-on-one family freedom design session for you, our faithful listener.
Yeah, if you want to hop on a call with our team, see if it's a good fit to build a business that creates time freedom for you, financial abundance, and helps you leave that thriving family legacy. That's what we're all about in our mastermind. You can grab a time on our team's calendar at rainmakerfamily.com/mastermind. Again, that's rainmakerfamily.com/mastermind.